the opportunities that you and I have had to meet on several occasions to discuss the many challenges facing the Department: funding for fire suppression, Endangered Species Act, funding for PILT, the severe drought affecting the West in my home state of California. It's clear that we have a lot of work to do addressing some very tough issues. While we won't agree on every single issue, I know from our conversations we both recognize the importance of listening to other points of view and trying to find common ground in solving problems. I'd like to mention a few things before we receive your testimony. First, the challenge of providing adequate wildfire funding each year is one of the greatest challenges facing our subcommittee. The cost of fighting wildfires, particularly the 1% of the most catastrophic fires that consume 30% of the fire budget, continues to grow each year. Of course, this puts pressure on every other account in our bill. I want to applaud my good friend and our former subcommittee chairman, Mike Simpson, for his efforts to address this issue through his bipartisan legislation, which proposes that we treat catastrophic fires as we do all other natural disasters like earthquakes, floods, and hurricanes. I'm happy to co-sponsor his bill along with 6 other members of this subcommittee and encourage other members to join the effort. Another challenge facing the Department and the subcommittee relates to the Endangered Species Act. The ESA, in my opinion, was a well-intentioned statute that is long overdue for a major overhaul. Like a number of my colleagues, I'm concerned that any future decision by the Department to list the sage-grouse under ESA would have a devastating effect in the West, with consequences felt across our entire national economy. If the Department lists the sage-grouse, oil and gas development in the West could be largely curtailed. The impact of listing the spotted owl some years ago would pale by comparison. Identifying a stable, long-term funding mechanism for payments in lieu of taxes, or otherwise known as PILT, is another major challenge. PILT has been a mandatory program under jurisdiction of authorizing committees since the fiscal year 2008. Fortunately, PILT was carried in the Farm Bill earlier this year. This is yet another challenge, funding challenge, that we need to find a long-term solution for. Lastly, we are in the midst of a drought that is likely to have far-reaching consequences on families and businesses in the West, particularly in my home state of California, and particularly Mr. Valadeo's district. This subcommittee is limited in what it can do to address the drought, but I believe me, Madam Secretary, that you are in a position to ensure that the Department does not repeat what I view as past mistakes in releasing critical water supplies into the Pacific Ocean. In closing, Madam Secretary, I want to express my appreciation to your fine professional staff. Our subcommittee simply couldn't do its work without folks sitting next to you and those sitting behind you. Thanks to each of you, what you do. And with that, I'm happy to yield to the gentleman from Virginia, my good friend, Mr. Moran, for any opening remarks. And I apologize, Jim, we're going to have a vote coming up any minute, so I thought we better get going because...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks very much.
He just ran a marathon.
Efficient, but yeah.
I ran a marathon on the way over here.
That's yeah.
So
well,
I recognize Mr. Moran.
This is our first hearing with you as chairman, Mr. Calvert, and sorry to be late. Of all the things that with Simpson, I didn't mind so much, but boy, when you're now you do have big shoes to fill. Mike was a terrific chair, and I know we're going to maintain that sense of bipartisan cooperation. We had a tough time last year, but I trust that this year is going to be much better. And hopefully it won't take 9 months to come up with an agreed-upon overall number that's acceptable to both sides. I want to welcome you, Madam Secretary. I just think you're the perfect person at exactly the right time, and it's nice to see you with Rhea and Pam. Mike will get to know you as well. This is your 1-year anniversary, and I know when you first came in, you likened this job to that of trying to drink from a water main. And I know it was a real baptism by fire, but you've done a great job. You have to wear a lot of hats. This is really in honor of former Chairman Simpson, Chairman Calvert, that I want to offer a quote, because Mike would eagerly anticipate those quotes. So this one is from Teddy Roosevelt, a great Republican president. I think we would all agree. And he said that this is your country. Cherish these natural wonders. Cherish the natural resources. Cherish the history and romance as a sacred heritage for your children and your children's children. Do not let selfish persons or greedy interests skin your country of its beauty, its riches, or its romance. Now, that's a bit more poetic than we normally use in our hearings, but we do know that our natural resources are not inexhaustible, and that whether it be through indifference, neglect, or the expedient demands of today, our natural, cultural, environmental heritage can be put at risk. The budget that we're working with is only 3.3% above the FY14 level, and without the disaster cap adjustment, interior funding is only 1% above the current appropriation. Our appropriation for last year was $883 million above FY12, but when you deduct the fire borrowing repayment and the increased funds budgeted for fire, the subcommittee actually had $426 million, almost $500 million less to spend on all the other programs in the Interior Environment Bill in FY14 than it did in FY12. So our bill was really not fixed by the sequester, and so it's against that backdrop that we have to look at Interior Department's funding, and I can only hope that when the FY15 allocation is made, Chairman Rogers, that we get a fair and workable allocation, and that the upcoming fire season is not too serious. But we do know you have your work cut out for you, Madam Secretary, and you should know that we value the work that you and all you dedicated employees at the Interior Department do day in and day out to meet your responsibilities for the natural resources of this nation. And we look forward to your testimony, and I want to thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Look forward to working with him. We're also joined today by our distinguished chairman of the full Appropriations Committee, Chairman Rogers, and I thank him for taking the time to contribute to this important conversation. Chairman Rogers, would you like to make an opening statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on assuming this chair. You'll be a good chairman of this committee. You're well qualified for it, and it fits your interests, I think, to a T. Madam Secretary, we're glad to welcome you here, your first appearance before this august body. This is where the rubber meets the road, this committee and your department and the others. It's the best interface there is between the executive and legislative branches. And so for that reason, we're delighted that you're here with your staff. We're moving along at a very brisk pace this year in appropriations, the quickest that I've seen since I've been around here. In order to keep this committee on track to try to pass all 12 of the appropriations bills and get us back to a sense of regular order, which we've missed direly for now many years. It's my goal, and it's that of Nita Lowy, the ranking member of the full committee. It's the same as with Senator Mikulski and Senator Shelby on the Senate side. Along with our subcommittee chairman and members, we're all determined to get this process back on the track so that each bill stands on its own, is debated, amended, changed, and conferenced with the other body, and sent to the President. We've gotten started with these hearings much sooner than we were able to last year, mainly because this year we've got a number that's been agreed upon by the House and Senate, and we don't have to wait on the Budget Committee. or even the executive branch. We're proceeding forthwith. And I appreciate your willingness to take the time to come here on a tight schedule that you have. I've been saying a lot about this over the last couple of weeks, but it's critical that we get back to regular order and pass these bills. The Fiscal 14 Omnibus Bill is a prime example of what we can accomplish when we work together. This committee was able to provide every facet of the federal government with adequate, responsible funding, even while we continued to reduce federal spending, totaling $165 billion in cuts since fiscal 10. As we've noted in previous years, the Department of Interior oversees a vast government enterprise that houses disparate agencies and missions related to the stewardship of our natural heritage and resources. And you, as Secretary of this very varied department, are presiding over agencies and units that have nothing in common with each other. You're a little bit like what a senator, leader in the Senate, said fairly recently, that his job was a lot like caretaker at a cemetery. A lot of people under him, but no one's listening. And I sympathize with you in that regard. One of these missions is paramount: your oversight of our nation's energy and natural resources. Energy is the backbone of the U.S. economy. Without cheap, reliable energy, businesses that have set up shop in the U.S. will look elsewhere. Uncertainty created by indecisiveness and bureaucratic overreach will inevitably raise energy costs and push businesses overseas and more Americans onto unemployment lines and welfare rolls. And I'll just be honest with you, it's near impossible to understand or comprehend what this administration's energy policy really is. During a weak economic recovery, for these several years now, American families struggling to make ends meet desperately want lower and more consistent energy prices. While the President would like to make it sound as though the administration has made great progress in expanding domestic production of conventional energy since 2008, the actual picture is far less rosy. Instead of pursuing policies that will guarantee American jobs and stable prices for our consumers, the administration has sought to institute its own regulation of carbon when it could not work its will with the legislation in Congress. The result has been a withering assault on the coal industry by the EPA, using draconian regulations to shut down the permitting process and ensuring that nearly 8,000 miners in my district alone have lost their jobs in the last several months. At the same time, there's been no interest in promoting American jobs through infrastructure projects like the Keystone Pipeline, a bipartisan and publicly supported effort to supply our country with cheap, secure Canadian oil. And while there's been a boom in the natural gas industry in recent years, it's likely that the environmental interests that this administration is beholden to will move to shut that down as well. There is no winner in this approach to American energy policy. What it amounts to is the politicizing of the American economy. Energy costs continue to rise, sorely needed jobs are eliminated, and our energy security is reduced, all in the name of satisfying specialized voting blocs. That's unfortunate. A recent study completed at Stanford University concluded that proposed carbon tax schemes would disproportionately impact low-income Americans more than corporations or the wealthy. While the administration has not been able to get its cap and tax regime passed, it has been diligently going about that same thing through regulation. The results are similar to those found in the Stanford study. Companies either close or shop or pass along the increased regulation costs to their consumers. My district in Kentucky, one of the poorest in the country, we're already feeling the devastating impact these policies will have on our nation as a whole. I'm also dismayed at today's news that despite years of concerns expressed by this committee and others, the EPA and the Corps of Engineers are working to create new rules that will place strict new standards on thousands of miles of dry beds and streams in this country, somehow construing the words navigable waters to dry bed creeks that have no water anytime. How can you navigate a dry bed full of rocks? These are streams which sometimes flow seasonally or after heavy rains, but by creating this new definition, the administration is again striking at Kentucky's economy and its workforce, since every hollow and valley in my region has such a stream or a lack of same running through it. This means that no economic activity, no road construction, no coal mining will ever occur without the say-so of a bureaucrat in Washington. And another layer of red tape will be added to the Gordian knot that already has strangled our people since the administration declared its war on coal. Madam Secretary, I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the implications of the actions taken by your agency regarding the production of domestic energy, vital to powering our economy. I hope that you can touch on these and other issues in your remarks so that we can have a better understanding of your department's plans. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm also pleased to see that our ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Lowy, is here today. I'm happy to yield the gentlelady for any opening remarks she would like to make.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Moran, and a great big warm welcome to you, Secretary Jewell. And I'd like to congratulate Chairman Calvert on your new role as chairman of the subcommittee, and a special thank you to Ranking Member Moran, who unfortunately, or fortunately, has announced that he will retire at the end of his term. Over the years, he and I have worked together to defend our clean land, our water and air, and sound the alarm regarding the threat that endocrine disruptors pose to our wildlife and public health. Virginia and this committee have benefited greatly from his service, and his retirement will be a great loss to this Congress. Madam Secretary, I'm very pleased that your budget complements Mr. Simpson's proposal, which is supported by many members of this subcommittee, to remove a portion of emergency wildfire funding from the annual Interior and Environment Appropriations Bill and make it eligible for funding under the disaster budget cap. Our current method of funding emergency wildland fire disasters with discretionary appropriations undermines the very principle of disaster aid by forcing agencies to borrow from other vital programs like hazardous fuels, reduction activities, which help prevent fires from happening in the first place. Disaster aid funding should reflect the recovery and mitigation needs on the ground, not our ability to raid other accounts. I'm hopeful that we will be able to address this issue during this year's appropriations process. Additionally, I strongly support your request for additional funding for the National Park Service Centennial Initiative in 2016. Over the years, visits by hundreds of millions of Americans each year have taken a toll on our national parks, and there is currently an infrastructure backlog of over $9 billion. The Centennial, our commitment The centennial presents the Congress with a unique opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to our national park system, and I hope to work with you to develop a funding mechanism to ensure that these special places are preserved for the next generation. However, I am disappointed that the department continues to propose cuts of approximately 50% to the National Heritage Area Program. In areas of the country where national parks aren't immediately accessible, this program furthers historic preservation and an appreciation of historic sites in a cost-effective way that encourages partnerships among state and local governments, nonprofits, and businesses. It seems to me that during this period of fiscal restraint, these are the very investments that we should be making more of, not less. I hope the next time that you are in New York, you will be able to join me on a visit to some of the really wonderful and magnificent attractions in the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area. Madam Secretary, thank you for appearing before the Interior and Environment Subcommittee. We certainly are very honored to have a person of your talent, your experience, and your commitment to agree at this difficult time to serve in this position. And I can assure you that I'm going to do everything I can to ensure that you have adequate resources when the committee writes its FY 2015 bill. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. I would like to now recognize Secretary for her opening statement.
Thank you very much. There we go. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. What up? And Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member, thank you very much for the opportunity here, and for the other subcommittee members. Look forward to your questions. I want to particularly thank you, Chairman Calvert, for reaching out to me as you assume the role of chairman. I appreciate the conversations we've had, both about California, but also how this committee works. And I want to recognize Ranking Member Moran, who's got the most patriotic tie-shirt combination I've seen in my life. It's really spectacular. But I want to particularly thank Congressman Moran, who from day one has reached out and helped me figure out, as a non-government person and a non-political person, how you navigate your way around this place, and I am really going to miss you. This is your last budget hearing and my first official budget hearing, so thank you so much for your work. I just want to recognize my team up here, my brand new, newly minted as of February 27th, Deputy Secretary Mike Connor, my colleague since I've been here, Rhea Sue, over Policy Management and Budget as Assistant Secretary, and her Deputy Assistant Secretary, Pam Hayes, who you all know, I'm sure, very well. It's been a year since I appeared before you in a casual setting, and I didn't know that 2013 was really extraordinary until I got in the middle of it, but we did survive sequestration and budget cuts. It was not pretty, especially to the young people we would have loved to welcome into the department, but didn't have room because of sequestration and cuts. But I want to express my appreciation, particularly to you, Chairman Rogers, and Ranking Member Lowy, for getting the budget for 2014 with a cap for 15. So we are, in fact, in a period of regular order, which is just enormously helpful in bringing clarity and certainty to us, no matter where the budget comes out. It's very helpful to have a budget. So from a big picture standpoint, this is a solid budget. It's responsible. It makes smart investments in Interior's missions, and it's within the budget caps of the Bipartisan Budget Act. Our budget proposal, as you know, $11.9 billion, is $279.4 million higher than in 2014, $240 million of which is to address emergency fire suppression, as was mentioned in a number of your opening comments. This is a new and prudent budget framework to ensure adequate funding to suppress severe, catastrophic fires as the fire seasons continue to grow hotter, drier, longer, and more expensive. So with thanks to Congressman Simpson for his tireless leadership on this, we are fully behind your efforts and those of your colleagues to change the way we look at wildland fire management. Our budget is very similar to the legislation that has been sponsored to balance suppression with fuels management and with post-fire restoration, with flexibility to address the extreme fires without impacting long-term fire management activities. Modeled after the Federal Emergency Management Disaster Relief Program, the fire cap adjustment would fund only the most severe 1% of fires within the existing disaster cap exemption. So thank you for your bipartisan and steadfast support on this. It's really important to us. Next, I want to talk about something very important to me, and that is support for Indian country and the Indian programs. It's been a key goal. I've listened to many Native leaders, and this budget includes full funding for contract support costs to allow federally recognized tribes to operate their federally funded programs. It also includes a new initiative, Tawahi, for $11.6 million. Tawahi is the Lakota word for family, and it begins to understand the interrelationships between poverty, housing, violence, and substance abuse that's faced by so many Indian communities as we work with tribes to chart a more constructive path forward for their communities. This request is complemented by a proposal for education and economic development in Indian country as part of the President's Opportunity Growth and Security Initiative. Next, I want to move on to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. The President's budget seeks to fulfill a historic commitment to Americans' natural and cultural heritage through full permanent funding to the Land and Water Conservation Fund as originally envisioned nearly 50 years ago when the fund was created from revenues from offshore oil and gas production to mitigate the impacts of development. It's been a very effective tool, popular across all states and counties, as it's been used for things like expanding access for hunting and fishing, creating ball fields and other places for children to play and learn, acquiring land and reducing fragmentation to facilitate efficient land management, conservation easements on private land to enable landowners to continue working their lands, and protecting things like Civil War battlefields. The President's budget includes $350 million in its appropriations for land and water conservation funding at Interior and the Forest Service, which together with the proposed legislation would provide a total of $900 million in 2015. And in 2016, the proposal includes full $900 million for the program available through permanent funding. As Ranking Member Lowy mentioned, the national parks are coming up on their centennial in 2016. And we know that there will be a lot more people that choose to visit their national parks. So to prepare for the milestone and to accommodate the increased visitation, we have an increase of $40 million in current appropriations in 2015. And that is combined with a recommendation for permanent investments of $1.2 billion over a 3-year period of time to support high priority projects to enhance the visitor experience for these additional visitors coming from all over the world to celebrate the centennial in national parks and to stimulate private donations. There is a very significant effort to raise private money, and a match will enable us to leverage federal dollars that much farther. The President's Opportunity Growth and Security Initiative also adds $100 million for deferred maintenance in national parks and $100 million for a centennial land management investment fund for Interior's land management bureaus and those of the U.S. Forest Service. Next, I want to talk about youth. We have a dramatic change going on in our country in terms of a generation that is entering the workforce at a very difficult time, and that mirrors an aging workforce that we have throughout the departments of the Interior. About the joke on leading a cemetery, pretty soon they may not be talking if the staff that I have currently continues to retire, and I don't have young people learning at their need to replace them. So we have proposed $51 million in the President's budget to support partnership programs, hiring, internships, and educational opportunities aimed at both youth and veterans between the ages of 18 and 30. It'll also leverage private donations, which I'm working hard to raise, and support work with Youth and Veterans Conservation Corps groups, the new generation version of the Civilian Conservation Corps, which leverages private organizations. On energy, the President's budget proposal maintains our commitment to energy initiatives that generate jobs and help the nation achieve greater energy self-reliance. In total, through all sources, the 2015 budget for energy programs is $753.2 million, a $40.7 million increase from 2014. It includes funding for conventional and renewable energy development, and basic science and applied research to understand and better manage the impacts of development on water, on habitat, wildlife, and other natural resources. We're taking a landscape-level approach to development. We're modernizing programs and practices. We're streamlining permitting. We're strengthening inspection and enforcement. And we're ensuring a fair return to the American public on our energy programs. On science, research and development conducted by the USGS and other bureaus is vital to help us understand and address current and important science questions. This budget includes a $60 million increase from the 2014 enacted level to improve our knowledge about issues such as climate change, hydraulic fracturing, Asian carp, and white nose syndrome in bats. As an example, Interior's climate science centers are developing regional drought impact scenarios, evaluating coastal flooding, and studying the impacts on the nation's wildlife and habitat to inform our land management decisions. And the last major category, which I know matters a great deal to the chairman of this subcommittee, and that's water. We recognize the challenges of water supplies, maybe a little bit too much water in Washington State right now, Congresswoman Herrera Butler. But this is a time of extended drought and profound drought in the West, and I'm very happy to have Mike Connor confirmed as Deputy Secretary with his deep background on these issues. Recognizing the importance of water conservation measures, the 2015 budget includes an increase of $9.5 million for our Water Smart program, with funding for drought response and resilient infrastructure. The Bureau of Reclamation, along with many partners, state and otherwise, is working on long-term solutions to address future water supply needs. The President also announced a $1 billion climate resilience fund. The fund would support research on the projected impacts of climate change, help communities become more resilient, and fund breakthrough technologies. These efforts are specifically designed to address the challenges of a changing climate on water resources. So in closing, I look forward to working with you through this budget session on any of these issues, and all of us are very happy to take your questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and I'm happy to recognize the chairman of the full committee for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Madam Secretary, thank you for your excellent statement. I want to compliment you on a particular item, a parochial matter of mine, which we've talked about even today, and that is the problem with the lake level at Lake Cumberland, which has been down 40 feet in water level for 7 years because of repairs to the dam. But in the meantime, as we then began to ramp back up to fill the lake back up to its full capacity, it's the biggest tourist attraction, I think, in Kentucky. We encountered a problem with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, who found a minnow in the upper reaches of the lake, which they said if we filled the lake back up, it would drown those fish, which I'm still having some difficulty wrapping my arms around. Nevertheless, by law, U.S. Fish and Wildlife had to conduct a biological study, which they undertook. And because of the urgency of the problem, because of the spring rains and the filling of the lake for the coming summer season, the Fish and Wildlife Agency under your jurisdiction took this personally, and you did, and I appreciate that. And just yesterday, the Fish and Wildlife issued their report several weeks earlier than they expected to. And the Corps today has informed me that they now will proceed. They're going to take some of these dusky-tailed darters, they call them, and put them in a fish hatchery and nurture them for a period of time, and then eventually relocate them back into their habitat once the lake level is up to its higher level. And that's a good outcome. And that's going to happen, they tell me, the Corps says. They can do this before the middle of May, which means the lake level can be raised to its summer pool for the summer. And that's great news economically for our region. We've lost all sorts of businesses over these 7 years. Marinas have closed, boat manufacturers have shut down. Now we can resume, hopefully, the very successful tourist effort that Lake Cumberland is. Thank you very much for attending to that forthwith. I yield.
I thank the chairman, and I feel your pain on minnows, Mr. Chairman. With that, be happy to recognize the ranking member, Ms. Lowy, for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much. The Department of Interior recently received approximately $860 million for habitat restoration, coastal resiliency, and building repairs to interior facilities in the Hurricane Sandy supplemental. I'm very pleased that the department has allocated the vast majority of its supplemental funding and is presently reviewing proposals for $100 million in coastal resiliency competitive funding to help local communities better prepare for future storms. The town of Stony Point, the Orange County Soil and Water Conservation District, the New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission have submitted applications to the Coastal Resiliency Competitive Grant Program for important projects to improve coastal habitat and infrastructure in my district. When do you think you're going to announce the awards for this grant program?
Thanks very much for the question. There was $100 million set aside for competitive grants, as you referenced, and we received 378 proposals for a total of $568 million. They're being evaluated right now. We expect that our panel of experts will have a decision made by June of 2014. I might also mention that New York alone has 84 of those proposals totaling $112 million. So you've been well represented, which is terrific. And we are working really hard to make sure that as we invest these monies, they help us learn about how to deal with future catastrophic events like this and how to prepare our landscape so that should something like this happen and not be a 100-year storm but a more frequent storm, that we're ready and we don't experience the same level of devastation.
Thank you. One other question. Under the budget request, the National Heritage Area Program would be funded at $9.2 million, a nearly 50% reduction from FY14. Last year, the National Park Service released a report stating that the 49 National Heritage Areas contribute $12.9 billion annually to the national economy, supporting 148,000 jobs, generating $1.2 billion in federal tax receipts. In my region, the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area contributes $538 million to the state's economy, supports 6,530 jobs, and generates $66.6 million in tax revenue. It's a very important program, spurs tourism and economic development, and is very popular. Are you concerned that slashing funding by nearly half would jeopardize the contributions that heritage areas make to promote job creation and outdoor recreation? And could you please explain why the proposed cut to the program is so large?
Ranking Member Lowy, I completely agree that heritage areas are very important, and there is one particular opportunity that I've been working on for over 20 years in my home state that we hope will earn that status at some point. Because they do drive tourism and recreation. They help us tell the stories of our history and our culture and our natural areas. They're also unique in that they are supported largely with public-private partnerships. And what we hope that the National Park Service brings is recognition and perhaps the famous arrowhead logo that folks want that helps drive tourism and traffic to an area. But we also want to encourage local communities to step up and support these places themselves. So we have to make hard choices in the budget, and the 50% cut is not reflective of a lack of support and appreciation for heritage areas. It's more reflective of heritage areas having an opportunity to work with local communities to get additional funding, and we want to try and encourage that activity while supporting communities that want to use heritage areas now and in the future to highlight their activities. So it's not a happy cut that was made to the budget, but it's not reflective of a lack of commitment to the program. It's more reflective of the way the program is designed to operate in partnership with communities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to say that I love your $4 million request for youth programs, and I know we'll have an opportunity to hear from you another time when I didn't have to run and vote about all the good things you want to do with it. It's so important to get our kids outdoors, away from those iPhones, the adults too, and get us off to the national parks. Thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you very much.
I thank the gentlelady for her question. We have about 3.5 minutes left in the vote, so at this point, will suspend and recess and encourage members to return after votes for further questions for the Secretary. Thank you. In the interest of time, I think I'll probably get forgiveness from my colleagues on the other side. And since Mr. Simpson has a hearing going on next door, I'm going to recognize him first for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And thank you all for being here, Mike and Secretary Jewell, Rhea, and Pam. It's great to have you here. I appreciate your opening testimony. Let me ask you a question. And I appreciate the mentioning of the wildfire fighting bill that we have before Congress. When you put your budget together, was it based on that wildfire fighting bill? The changes that this bill proposes that is in the House and the Senate?
You were working on yours as we were working on our budget. Rhea was working very closely with OMB, and I just want to applaud her efforts on making sure that the administration fully understood the issues. So I can't say that the budget perfectly aligns with the bill. The basic core is the same, and I'll turn to Rhea, who's got a lot more detail on what's in the budget and what's in your bill.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we very much appreciate your leadership, as the Secretary stated, and as we went through the formulation process, we tried to mirror as closely as possible what we understood your interests in the legislation to be, which are similar, obviously, on both the House and the Senate. So yes, I think we're almost 100% lockstep in concept. There are a couple of individual places where we diverge, but essentially it's the same thing.
Have you funded the expected wildfire fighting costs, not at the 10-year average, but at 70% of the 10-year average in this bill? Is that your recommendation?
So 70% of the 10-year average is included in the discretionary requests in the budget. 30% of the 10-year average is part of what we're asking for the cap adjustment to be.
So if that cap adjustment does not happen, if we don't pass either the wildfire fighting bill or a cap adjustment in an appropriation bill, which would then make it subject to the Budget Committee, which would be a problem. So we have to pass that wildfire fighting bill to get the cap adjustment. If we end up not being able to do that, because there are some people opposed to this, I can't imagine why, but there are some people that are opposed to it, does that put us in a more difficult position in that we're going to then be borrowing even more out of the accounts we're trying to stop borrowing out of?
Sir, that's exactly right. I think it puts us squarely back in the very irrational place of having to rob Peter to pay Paul, not having predictable, reliable sources of funding for our preparedness programs, including our hazardous fuels programs. So I think if we are unsuccessful in getting a cap adjustment, we all face very large challenges in terms of how we actually appropriately fund fire moving forward.
Yeah. And I think it's very important for people to understand that we're not trying to find more money to spend on wildfires. We're going to spend whatever it takes to put the wildfires out. What we're trying to do is change the habit of borrowing out of accounts, repaying them later, most of the time anyway, when the season is over and stuff. And that's, instead of trying to pay for a natural disaster like you do in hurricanes and stuff after it's happened, we're trying to change how we manage the account as we're fighting the wildfires. So I appreciate what you're doing here, but we need to understand as a committee that we need to get this wildfire fighting bill done if, in fact, we are going to fund wildfire fighting at 70% of the cost. Otherwise, you're going to have to put in the 10-year average under the FLAME Act, both in your budget and in the Forest Service budget. Second question, sage grouse. Not surprisingly, some of the states are complaining that they're not being involved as fully as they would like to be involved in this potential listing of sage grouse. I think we have, till the end of 2015 or something like that before a decision has to be made. Where are we with that and with states? They have some concerns, as I've heard from stakeholders, that the department is not fully engaged in with the states, and Fish and Wildlife isn't fully engaged with the states in trying to look at the state management plans.
So I'll take that one. The Fish and Wildlife Service and the BLM are fully engaged with all of the states. I've personally met with all of the governors on several occasions, just in your home state, as you know, mostly talking about fire, but did spend time talking about sage grouse with some of your colleagues from the delegation. Each state is approaching it in a different way, and the states, through the Sage-Grouse Task Force, are working together, comparing notes and pulling each other along. Some states are focused more on private land programs. Some states, the governors have mandated private land compliance, which is much easier for the Fish and Wildlife Service to count in terms of knowing it will happen as opposed to voluntary measures. In some states, the burden largely falls on the BLM because of the amount of land we have or the way the states have chosen to work it. What's important to know is that we are working very closely together with the states, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the BLM to do everything we can to preclude the need of a listing of the species.
I appreciate that. And one last question, Mr. Chairman, if I could, before I have to run off, which I'm sorry that I have to go to because I like to listen to the whole testimony and stuff, and I understand the Chairman is going to ask about PILT and how that's going to affect the budget in the future and so forth. But I have to tell you, one of the concerns I have in this budget, it's a concern I had with your predecessor and with every budget that I've seen come out of the department, and I don't know where the kickback is, whether it is from OMB, from the department, from the administration, whoever. We're putting something like $50 million in trying to get kids out into the wilderness or, outdoors, all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, there is not one dime proposed to replace some of the most shattered schools in this country. You said during your original testimony before the Senate, I think on confirmation, that Indian education was a disaster. Paraphrase. But yet, the administration has never proposed any new funding for schools. And I can tell you, when Tom and I and Betty went out into South Dakota, we visited some schools out there that you wouldn't send your pets to. And it's a disgrace. And we've got to do something about Indian education, and I wonder about putting $50 million in trying to get kids out and enjoy conservation and all that kind of stuff, which I fully agree with. When we've got children in this country that can't read and write, and we have a responsibility to do it. We have two types of schools that the government funds, the military schools and the Indian education schools. And while we're in the process of, I think it's about a $3 or $4 billion rebuild of the military schools, we're letting the Indian schools go to worse than they are. So that's a concern I have, but it's something that I expect the department to address, and I hope this committee will address it also, because you've got a lot of supporters on this committee that are also very concerned about that same thing.
Understood.
But I appreciate your efforts on Indian health. We're getting to where we ought to be with Indian health. We still have some room to go in purchase services and a few other things, but I appreciate your support for that.
Thanks. If I could just have a quick response. Very quick. We've set up a study group along with education to address the issues of Indian education. One of the people that's on that study group is the former head of DODEA, which is the Department of Defense schools that do a very nice job. Very different situation, completely transient as opposed to completely place-bound. We have invested $2 billion in Indian schools over the last 10 years, but there's still a very, very significant need. And I just trying to add up, I think I've been to 15 different reservations, sat down with educators. We've put in place Monty Russell as head of the Bureau of Indian Education. He's working very closely with the Department of Energy. So I understand there is part of the Opportunity Growth and Security Initiative, a commitment to put additional resources into Indian education, and there is an increase in the budget. But on school construction, there's just one school, the Beatrice Rafferty School in Maine, that we're continuing to take baby steps forward, but we're focusing more on the classroom than on the buildings, and I appreciate your comments. We have, a lot of them are in really bad shape. Thank you.
Okay, thank the gentleman. Now I'm happy to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Moran, for any questions.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to associate myself as well, and I think you do, and Tom does, and Betty, and in terms of the comments that Mike made with regard to Indian education. Programs for American Indians are going to get a bipartisan level of support here. So it's an opportunity for us to be able to work together on something both sides of the aisle care about, and we really would like to see an adequate investment. And it doesn't need to preclude the other initiatives, but of all the things we should be able to find money for, that certainly should be at the top of the list. So I'm glad that Mike raised the issue. Let me raise another very different issue, though. You receive innumerable complaints from certain quarters that the Interior Department isn't doing enough to develop oil and gas on public lands. It does seem, though, that the oil and gas production on public lands is up more than a third. It's about 35% from even the last years of the Bush administration. Yet the oil industry seems to be sitting on thousands of already approved permits to drill. Maybe you could share with us what you're doing, Madam Secretary, to encourage the responsible and timely development of these approved permits to drill, and what steps are you taking to help improve the return to the American people and the use of these public resources?
Thanks for the question, Congressman. You are right in your statistics, pretty darn close anyway. The onshore federal oil production increased by about 30% over 2008. Outer continental shelf oil production increased by 2% over 2008. And the energy budget has increased by 49% over that same period of time. So we certainly have been investing. There is a proposal in this budget to ask the oil and gas industry to at least pay the part of the cost of what we need to do to ensure that development onshore is done safely and responsibly. Offshore, through the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, we have the ability to charge industry for what it costs us to ensure that their activities are done safely. We also can charge them for the fees necessary to offset our costs in terms of permitting. That's not true onshore. So there is a proposal in this budget to charge only 25% of the cost of onshore inspections by the BLM to the oil and gas industry, so that we can take the resources that we have, and we're competing for petroleum engineers along with industry to do this right. We could take a portion of that money and put it into streamlining our permitting process. We've got some suggestions in the budget for changing the fee structure to charge an annual fee for permits that are held but not drilled. So there is incentive for businesses when they get a permit to drill that they actually do in fact drill, so that they can begin to generate a return for the taxpayer on that investment. And if they don't, there's a fee charge to address that. Rhea and Pam can get into more detail if you want on the numbers, but in terms of structure, that's where we're going.
No, that's very good. I'm glad you put that on the record. Thank you. It seems like a pretty sweet deal still for onshore drilling to only have to pay a quarter of the cost to the Interior Department. Madam Secretary, for almost 2 years now, the Bureau of Land Management has been working on the development of regulations regarding the use of fracking to develop oil and gas on public lands. So can you share with us the status of the proposed regulations? Can we expect those regulations to enforce a high level of safety for the public as well as protect the environment?
Thanks for the question. This was, they were very much in the thick of taking input from the first round of comments when I got here, and had released based on those comments, a second draft proposed rule about this time last year. They received 1.3 million comments back, and they're in the process of analyzing those and expect to have the rule sometime in 2014 published. Science continues to evolve. The USGS has money in the budget to do specific research around hydraulic fracturing to understand what's happening, whether it's induced seismicity, the importance of wellbore integrity, and other things which are in our, the wellbore integrity is a critical part of this. I am confident that what we put out there will update the 30-year-old regulations that we're currently using. But I also know, as I've fracked wells before and I've been in the industry, that technology moves on and we need to continue to look at it and apply the best available science. So when you see the rules come out, it will be the best knowledge we have at the time for keeping fracking safe and responsible, and it also will incorporate what we've learned from states that have been doing this for a long time that have done a good job.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I'd like to, as mentioned, we have some difficulties within this budget. It was mentioned the wildfire portion of the budget, and we have to work out an agreement with the Budget Committee, obviously, to do what we'd like to accomplish, unless Mr. Simpson is successful in passing his legislation and having it passed in the Senate and signed by the President before the end of summer. So that may be difficult to do. So if that doesn't happen, we're going to have a problem there. The other problem we have is PILT, and the other problem we have is the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And as you know, the authorization for the Land and Water Conservation Fund expires September 30th, 2015. Likewise, the payment in lieu of taxes and secure rural schools authorizations also expire at the end of 2015. This presents Congress and the administration with a unique opportunity, potentially, to provide permanent funding for each of these critically important programs by linking them together. The challenge, of course, is finding a suitable offset or income to pay for it. You've discussed in general terms this concept of linking these three programs together. Would you be supportive of linking a permanent funding stream for Land and Water Conservation Fund, a permanent funding stream for PILT, and secure rural schools? And has the administration given any consideration to that concept?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's a good idea to link the three programs together. Do recognize that as land is put in the federal estate and taken off the tax rolls, that there's an impact on local counties and communities. I'm very well aware of that. And I think moving beyond whether it's the Farm Bill or an annual reauthorization process on PILT would be very helpful. Also know that Land and Water Conservation Fund is a very important program, as I referenced in my opening remarks, that has been used across the country. So I think it makes sense to link the two. I'm going to ask Rhea whether you've had more conversations with OMB and the administration. I don't know if the administration's taken a position on this, but it's certainly something that I would advocate for.
I don't believe the administration has taken a position on this, but we are collectively very eager to work with members of this committee and members of this body to further this idea that is quite intriguing, the idea that I think originally was proposed by Chairman Simpson, and we know that Chairman Bishop has also expressed some interest in this. So whatever we can do to try to be helpful in furthering those discussions, I think we're absolutely all in.
Well, I'm certainly going to have discussions with the authorizing committee, but obviously paying for this proposal is critical. So do you have any suggestions or suitable offsets that might be considered? Any thought that the agency has put into this?
I'll start off.
Okay.
So I think, Mr. Chairman, you pose obviously the critical question here. I think we would all like to see a lot more certainty, both for PILT reauthorization and permanent reauthorization, as well as for LWCF. But how we ultimately find that offset, as big as that offset needs to be, if those two things are coupled, is a challenge. As you've seen over the course of many years, the administration has offered a number of mandatory legislative proposals that provide revenue offsets. So I think, the list of proposals that we have in the budget and that we have submitted, again, for many years now are a place to start. But from there, I think, again, collectively, we would very much like to engage with your staff to further those conversations.
Well, we'll certainly put, and have been putting a lot of thought, but we need to, this problem's not going away, and so we need to work on this, or we're going to have difficulties putting together
I just
suitable
want to,
budget.
if I could, Mr. Chairman, one little supplemental comment. In talking with people from the oil and gas industry, say, we've been paying into this fund basically for 49 years with the intent of it funding LWCF, and it hasn't been funded, that there may be support from the industry on saying, as we have done this mitigation for years through what we've paid in our oil and gas revenues to fund LWCF. We expect it to be funded. I think we have to look broadly at the budget overall. I don't have a magic bullet for an offset, but it is a popular program, just as PILT is an essential program to address the issues in local counties, and we will work with you on that.
I know it'd be impossible to believe that the appropriators would divert money from what it was intended for, but nonetheless, Land and Water Conservation Fund is expiring at 2/15. It gives us an opportunity, along with PILT and rural schools, potentially to have a permanent fix to this problem, which especially is important in rural areas throughout the United States. And next, Ms. McCullough, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And even though I represent an urban area in Minnesota, those issues are very, very important to my state, and I would look forward to working with you, Secretary, as well as this committee on that issue. But let me thank you again for you and your staff and all the work that you're doing, all the outreach that you did, right away with everybody, all the travel around to different areas, because this is such a big area that this committee covers. I mean, 566 federally recognized tribes, our natural resources. You have a broad and important mission, and we look forward to working with you. For the record, I'm going to be submitting some questions on the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and you can expect that they're going to include schools and health care along with some other issues. And I am also very curious as to what the department is doing in the area of climate change, especially as we talk about many issues, but in this committee, the issue of wildfires, the effects of climate change on the way that wildfires have been spreading and the intensity of them. But today I'm going to focus on two issues that span multiple agencies within your department. And one is reviewing receipts, and the other is invasive species. So with revenue receipts, we all hear, and I worked in the private sector for years, government needs to run more like a business. And so you as a former business executive, you know the importance of maximizing your dollars for your shareholders and to have value to your customer. So in this budget, your department proposes to generate nearly $3 billion more in revenue receipts than you propose to spend within the department. In other words, you're a giver, not a taker. That's a $3 billion profit, and it sounds like a great turn on investments to me, but I still have questions about whether we're getting our fair market value for the use of all of our natural resources. So my first question would be, what reforms and proposals are suggested in this budget to increase revenue receipts and benefits for our stockholders, the American taxpayer? My second question has to do with something that I appreciate all the work that this committee has been supportive on, and that's invasive species. Invasive species not only harm our ecosystem, but they have the ability to harm our economy through industries like timber, agriculture, and tourism, whether it's Asian carp, kudzu, emerald ash board. Now we've got Burmese pythons and Nile crocodiles down in Florida. It's essential that we address these challenges with a comprehensive strategy. We must and we can do better. We must have a coordinated plan, and that includes all levels of government along with universities, private, nonprofit organizations. We need to allocate our resources now so that we're not spending more later. What is in this budget to help the Department of Interior address this growing problem of invasive species? What resources or authorization should we be asking from the authorizing committee from Congress to give you the opportunity to more effectively confront this problem?
Okay, I'll try and let me start with your last question first, and we'll see how much time remains. I'm very happy to take questions for the record as well. Looking at invasive species, they're a problem across all of the lands that we manage in every agency. So we have an increase of $4.6 million, for example, for the USGS. The Asian carp problem, which you're very familiar with in your region, is something USGS is working on. eDNA sampling methods of preventing the species from migrating into the Great Lakes and so on. The Fish and Wildlife Service has an increase of $4.3 million for invasive species control as well. You think about the sage-grouse issue that Congressman Simpson brought up earlier. There is an invasive species that not only impacts sage-grouse habitat, but it's fire-enabled cheatgrass, and it makes the situation worse. So there's money in the Fish and Wildlife Service to do a better job of understanding the impact of invasive species on landscapes. We also have modest increases in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, as well as in our insular areas in the Pacific, where invasive species like the brown tree snake, for example, are continuing to be a big problem. So we take it very seriously. We're working to help private landowners understand the impact of invasives so that they can be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem. On a couple of the other things you mentioned, if you want a quick answer, addressing the issues of climate change runs throughout our budget. The USGS and its climate science centers would be, very much at the focal point of understanding the science behind climate change and its impact on the landscapes. But I have asked every department to think about three things: constrained resources, the changing demographics of our country and youth, and climate change into everything they do. And there's I'm looking at these numbers here. It looks like $176 million specifically for climate change across the entire organization, and that's up about $27 million from 2014. On the revenue receipts, I want to compliment Rhea Sue and some of our colleagues in pulling the collection of revenue out of what was the Minerals Management Service and putting it under the Office of Policy Management and Budget to make sure that we are getting a fair return for taxpayer. We are following up on concerns about whether those returns are in fact being audited appropriately and collected appropriately, and we will continue that effort. I don't know if you want to say anything additional, if that covers it, Rhea.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I just would perhaps add that over the course of many, many years, the revenue collection function within MMS had long been the source of many GAO and IG reports of criticism, and in the last 3 years we've managed to clear up all of those IG reports, and we are no longer a high-risk activity as defined by the GAO. So we're quite proud of that.
That's great.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, though, and you don't have to answer it right now, what do you need in order to, on the invasive species, different bureaus, different agencies need to take different leads at different times, and what do we need to do working with everyone, universities, for-profit, nonprofit, and everything, to make that work in the future? You can get back to me, but I know it's not a cookie cutter that works one way, doesn't work for every invasive species. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cole.
Thank you
Oh,
very
and by the
much.
way, just excuse me for 1 minute. The Secretary is working on a hard 4:15, so if we can try to stay within the 5 minutes, that would be appreciated.
Wish you'd have said that earlier. First, thanks for being here. Thanks for the great job you and your team do. I do want to associate myself very quickly. I don't want to keep on this topic, but I agree very much with what Mr. Simpson had to say. I mean, all of Indian country, not one school, not one new school. I mean, that's something we ought to look at. This committee worked hard, working with you, to try and avoid that last year. And if it's only a statement that we really do care. And I think what a place that you go to school looks like kind of tells you, if you're a student, what people think about you and your potential. So I think that's an area that we need to find some common ground on. Second, if you could give, I've got two sort of global questions and then one very parochial one. Could you give us a quick update on where we are on the COBEL implementation? Now, you came on right at a transition point, and that's a huge settlement issue, and I think the department has a lot to be proud of in terms of the negotiated settlement and what was done. I'm wondering about the implementation, where we're at right now.
I'll give a quick rundown, and if Mike, you want to add anything, if I miss something. We are full tilt on the COBEL settlement. It is being run out of the Deputy Secretary's office. We recently issued offers for $100 million on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Highly fractionated lands. I was just in Montana and also meeting with the Montana-Wyoming Tribal Council. Tribes in that area have in some cases 1,200 owners on one particular parcel. So we're working on cooperative agreements with a number of tribes. I signed one with the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribes. We have one with Pine Ridge that's working well. We are learning this as we go along too, and trying to streamline and make it clear to tribes that our objective is to get all of this money out to reduce the fractionated interest as quickly as possible to get that land into trust for tribes. It's not intended to be an tribal employment program. It is intended to get these fractionated interests dealt with, which is what the Cobell settlement is all about. So I'm very proud of how hard the team is working to make it happen. $100 million just in the last few weeks is a great statement. We're learning as we go along. We're doing mass appraisals. There's comments about whether they have enough of a shelf life, whether we should look at longer periods. There's things that we're adjusting along the way, but we're very, very committed to making this happen. Anything you want to add? All right.
Okay, second question. Last year, one of the things I was proudest of Congress doing was reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, particularly adding the tribal provisions. Can you tell us where the department is in helping give tribes the capacity to actually carry out the authority that we've now given them in the areas of sexual abuse?
There is an increase in our proposed budget for tribal law enforcement. That is proven to be a huge driver of these activities. The VAWA, which I'm very appreciative that it made its way through Congress and was signed, that's the good news. The bad news is it's just being applied in a pilot way as we learn our way forward and figure out how it gets applied. So I'm learning these things as I go out to tribes and figure out what's happening on the ground. The Tuahi initiative that I referenced is an attempt to actually get at root cause. So working between some of the root cause issues with the law enforcement issues, we hope to make Indian country a lot safer for women than it has been and that it is right now. So there is additional money in the law enforcement budget, and there is joint efforts going on with the Department of Justice to try and implement VAWA effectively for tribes, but it's a slower implementation process than we would like.
I think it's going to take quite a while, but if there's anything we can do to assist in that, please let us know. I think it's a really important initiative. Last, and by the way, thank you for the amount of time you do spend in Indian country. I mean, I've seen your footprints everywhere, and thank you for coming to Oklahoma and Citizen Potawatomi Band. It makes such a powerful statement when you're there, and your interest in these issues is so obvious to people. Last parochial question, and you may not, this is just something I want you to keep an eye on. We're in negotiations right now with the Park Service, the Chickasaws and the Park Service, about the long-term status of the Chickasaw National Recreation Area. And this is a park that, frankly, the core of which the Chickasaw Nation gave to the United States originally at the time of the Dawes Act to preserve and protect it. We've built a lot of facilities around it, a visitor center, which I think the Park Service is actually going to move at least some of their operations in. I would tell you they should move all of their operations in there. I mean this quite seriously as a cost saving. It's silly to stay partly where they are in the same town and not in these facilities, and they are terrific. But we've gotten good cooperation at the regional level. But there's always been some resistance, and this is one where the tribe has the money and will invest more than the federal government could ever invest in trying to upgrade it and operate it jointly. They do this, by the way, with the state of Oklahoma on a couple of state parks that are in their area. They do it on the state visitor centers as you enter from Texas. So this is something they're really good at and really want to work hard at. So I would just commend. I think it's a splendid opportunity for tribal federal partnership, and one, again, that will bring additional resources in the tune of millions of dollars into that facility. So please look at it, and whatever you can do to foster it and kind of push it along a little bit, it would be much appreciated.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Pengreve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much for being here with us today and all the work you've done in your first year here. I know there's a lot of other people having to ask questions, so I'll submit as much as I can for the record, and I want to echo some of the things that other people have said on a whole variety of issues, particularly your work on climate change. That's a growing issue for all of us in coastal communities, some of the fishing industry impacts, and the impact on farming, and certainly want to add a couple of our invasive species while you're working at it. I know a lot of states are dealing with milfoil, but not everyone has the green crab problem that we do, and it's just an increasing issue in our shell fishery and lobster fishery. Just two quick things. I would love to have you talk a little bit about wildlife refuge budgets. I know there's a slight increase, but not a lot, and that's has a great economic impact in our state with the Rachel Carson Wildlife Refuge, and it's a big, important part of the surrounding communities. And similarly, Acadia National Park, I know, and I really appreciate that you're focusing on the centennial, that you're thinking about how to get capital funds back in there and other money in there. But Acadia, in a recent study, was one of the top, one of the most devastated parks due to the sequester. We don't have a winter park activity. We don't have a fall season without the fall, and that came just at the worst time for those communities and for the park. So I know the budget can't make up everything that the park has already lost, but can you talk a little bit about the increases in funding and how we're going to make sure that helps bring parks back to the place where they should be by the centennial?
I completely agree that we have really been challenged in terms of both wildlife refuges and parks in maintaining them at the level that the visitors expect of us, and in carrying out the mission. And it was very difficult to start this job in 2013, where I saw the impacts up close, like wildlife refuges that should have 13 people on staff and they're down to 5. And so we are recovering from that with a budget, which is helpful, but we've certainly lost some ground. We do have an increase of $20 million, Pam, is that right, in the appropriation for, is that for wildlife refuges?
That was refuges, that was the increase from 13 to 14, and we sustained that, and then there's an additional increase of $4 million in 2015.
So it's modest compared to the total, but it's important. On the national park side, as I referenced in the opening comments, in the budget we've got $40 million. 30 of that goes directly to fund park operations. 10 million is a matching grant program for private philanthropy, because we know there's a lot of interest, and Acadia is a beneficiary of private philanthropy as well, so that we can encourage those kinds of contributions. But it's been a long time since we collectively as a nation invested in some of these resources, and it's going to take a long time to get them back to where they need to be. We have asked the parks to give us their highest priority projects, and in the proposed $1.2 billion authorization over 3 years, that addresses the, it certainly doesn't take care of the maintenance backlog that you referenced, but it takes care of some of the most high priority things, so people are finding functional toilets, they are finding a functional visitor center, they are, at least on the surface, having a good visitor experience as we work on a longer term solution, which I think will involve private philanthropy as well. So thank you for your support, and I've been to Acadia. It's a beautiful place. I've hiked all over it, and yes, it could use a little maintenance money, too.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gentlelady. Ms. Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to specifically, I have a couple questions, so I'm going to talk fast, but you're good, so you can handle this. One of the benefits of this committee is we get a chance to talk to the heads of just about every agency. And last year, I was pleased to talk with Director Ash, Fish and Wildlife, Deputy Director Cornsey of BLM, and Chief Tidwell of Forest Service. And all have agreed that the approach we have taken to species management is not working. I should say single species management with regard to Gifford pinchot and spotted owl. The spotted owl has continued to decline over the 20 years of this policy. And in talking with them, a lot have acknowledged that a more ecosystem approach would better benefit not just the owl, but the other species. We've actually seen dozens more put at risk because we've focused myopically on one species, including the endangered American wage earner. I have several counties that, because of that myopic focus on one species, have really begun to degenerate the forests and the families there. I guess I would submit to you, we are resource rich. I know that your 3 priorities are constrained resources, climate change, and the young people, and those are honorable goals. I'm not saying that this is mutually exclusive, but as you move forward, and I will have these questions for the other agency heads who are coming in, what role can you play in being and having that department become more active when it comes to active management to improve the health of the forests, the species, and the communities that depend on those forests. Because I was actually hearing a tremendous solution. Perhaps we could do a demonstration project. And I'm not saying change the forest plan. Let's keep the forest plan. But let's perhaps sell some of the timber that's in the forest plan, use some of that money to cover PILT or secure rural schools, or, I mean, when talking about land and water conservation, we need ideas. I heard everybody here say we need ideas. Let's perhaps try and manage some of that. And I think with some of the constraints with regard to the myopic focus on the single species has really caused us to let our resources falter. So I'd like your thoughts.
Well, thanks very much for the question and sharing the same home state and being a banker there for 19 years through the ups and downs of the timber industry. I very much appreciate the challenges that a lot of the rural communities have throughout the Northwest. And I will say that one of the three things I mentioned were trends. They aren't priorities, they're trends I just want people to keep in mind: constrained resources, changing demographics, and climate change. In terms of priorities, one of the key priorities I lay out is a landscape level understanding of our resources, looking at things on more of a landscape scale. Because you're right, a single species doesn't define what's happening within an ecosystem. It may be a canary in a coal mine, it may be an indicator, but we need to look broadly. And that is the approach that is being taken across the Department of the Interior as we look at these landscapes. There's no question that jobs and economic activities are very important to factor in. The health of whole ecosystems a lot of times are manifest in how species do, not just single species, but broad species. And we do know that when you upset a balance, you can have challenges. You can have growth in one area, barred owls, for example, that may be impacting something else like a spotted owl. So I have seen tremendous creativity, flexibility, and commitment on the part of our Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as BLM and other land management agencies, on looking more holistically at landscapes. Say the work happening on sage-grouse would be an incredible illustration of that broadly.
So as we move forward, and I think Director Ash is going to be coming back before the committee, would you be willing to commit to having some sort of a working discussion on perhaps implementing some of these ideas? I mean, I'm glad that people are coming to the recognition, but we have to have some action, because I'm concerned about the health, the actual resource of our forests. And we talk about these catastrophic wildfires, beetle and bark infestation and disease, not just the families, although that's my primary focus. But we've got some real ideas with regard to how we do NEPA and do a timber sale and selectively manage and harvest for the health of the forest and the species. But we keep getting pushed back. And I think some reinforcement from the top might give some strength as these directors are really trying to move new and innovative ideas.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, and I think the Forest Service, which is in the Department of Agriculture, is more involved in the state of Washington than the BLM. BLM more in Oregon, and we are, in fact, looking at what is that sustainable yield on the ONC lands that supports the mills, supports the jobs, but also supports the habitat. So yes, you have my commitment to continue to work on more of a landscape level, and in fact it's consistent with the first secretarial order I issued, which was around landscape level understanding and mitigation, looking broadly at landscapes, not at individual projects, so that we can really satisfy all of the areas that you mentioned.
And I think that's part of it. We're very anxiously watching what's happening with the ONC lands. We're hopeful that can yield a model, so to speak. But everybody always points back at Fish and Wildlife and say, well, that's why. And then when I had a great conversation with Director Ash, I didn't see that was why. So I don't know if it's it's just mindsets of people who've been there for a while. That's what I'm trying to break through.
We do have a number of species that we have to address on an individual listing basis, sage-grouse being one that have date specific. It doesn't mean, though, that the Fish and Wildlife Service isn't looking at landscapes. They are, and they recognize that individual species they have to make a determination on sits within a broader landscape, and that is how they're looking at their work.
Well,
Thank you, gentlelady. Mr. Joyce.
We have to share. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Madam Secretary. I would like you to know that Ms. Congresswoman McCollum and I have managed to make a fan of our chairman, Mr. Calvert of the Great Lakes, of something we have a lot of interest in. And And I know.
Depends on if you find any money for pills.
But and to that point, the proposed Fish and Wildlife and the Geological Service budget includes increased base funding for invasive species, especially the Asian carp. These requests are split among Great Lakes and upper Mississippi areas, river areas. Other pathways have been identified for Asian carp to enter the Great Lakes, including Mosquito Lake, which is in my Northeast Ohio district. Will the funds, both designated for the Great Lakes and for areas outside the Great Lakes, support efforts to make sure other pathways are indeed, don't become entry points for Asian carp into Lake Erie and the other Great Lakes?
So a lot of the USGS work is in identifying where the species are and what works in stopping them from migrating. So you're right that there is money in the USGS budget. I have $6.4 million increase in both Fish and Wildlife and USGS to address this specific issue. They're looking at chemical control mechanisms. They're developing lures to help remove the species. They're doing testing methods to restrict the passage of the fish, and also looking at early detection tools, which I think no matter where the species are is going to help us generically prevent them from spreading.
That's fantastic. But my concern is more that it'll be spread around the potential entry areas versus just located in that certain upper Mississippi River area.
Yeah. I don't have more information about where they're doing their research. Pam, and anybody else? If not, we'll get back to you with a more detailed answer.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Another quick question. The funding request for the GLRI, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, has dropped to $275 million in the most recent budget request. Given the Department of Interior has been the #2 recipients of funds from the GLRI, how is this $25 million decrease expected to impact the department and its agencies' work in restoring habitat, performing invasive species research, monitoring and control, and providing technical assistance, among other things?
So this year, the Interior Bureaus will receive about $62 million from EPA through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. For 2015, we've submitted projects totaling $51 million. There's been a lot of work that's gone into the Great Lakes. As in other areas, we're making some difficult decisions on our budgets in terms of how to invest effectively and continue to make progress. Chesapeake, Puget Sound, Everglades, Great Lakes, very, very important projects. So that reflects a juggling of budgets to try and make continued forward progress. But it's kind of where the chips fell when we added up the numbers.
We can't afford to make a mistake there because it's game, set, match once they're in the Great Lakes.
Understand.
Lastly, on behalf of a fellow Appropriations Committee member who does not sit in the subcommittee, would ask me if you could identify in the Code of Federal Regulations which states the Department of Interior agencies may hold state and private landowners liable for habitat conservation expenses to avoid an Endangered Species Act listing when the habitat is controlled by the federal government.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
It says, please identify your authority in the Code of Federal Regulations, which states the Department of Interior and agencies may hold state and private landowners liable for habitat conservation expenses to avoid an Endangered Species Act listing when the habitat is controlled by the federal government. And you feel free to answer, follow up with that answer another time.
The gentleman might submit that for the
Yes.
for the record, and if you can get back to us
Happy to do that.
on that to get an answer,
Sure.
I would
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you,
Didn't
Jim.
need it right now. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I want to thank Mr. Valadeo for his courtesy to allow Mr. Stewart to get into questions for he can get back.
And I want to thank him as well, Mr. Chairman. He was quick to remind me that I am the least senior member of the committee. We apparently don't seat according to looks.
The gentleman will yield back his time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Secretary, thank you. You have sat before other committees that I've actually chaired one of them previously, and I appreciate your demeanor. I think many of us do, and we appreciate the leadership. We don't, as you know, agree on some things, but we appreciate the leadership and, again, your graciousness. There's just so many things I'd like to discuss with you, and frankly, we don't have time, so I'd like to mention them if I could, and then maybe elicit your support that we could work on them together to find to find a solution. Before I do that, though, if I could just echo that of the chairman, PILT and secure roads is just enormously important to me in my district. There are a couple districts in my, a couple counties in my district that are 93% controlled by the federal government. These are poor counties as a gracious description, and the uncertainty with PILT and then some of the reductions on SRS is just very, very hard for these poor counties and rural counties. So if we could look forward to that and allowing some stability for them. The first thing, if I could, and that is this, you may remember a long, long time ago, last fall, we had the government shutdown. My state, Utah, as well as a number of others, North Dakota, Colorado, Arizona, New York, Tennessee. Our governor stepped forward, kept some of the state parks open for 8 or 10 days. That cost them a little bit of money. I think there was an understanding that they would be reimbursed for that. That hasn't happened yet. Did you see a problem with that reimbursement back to those states?
Thanks for the question, Congressman. I think you meant national parks, not state parks.
I'm sorry, yes.
Correct that?
Of course, yeah.
There were many, many late nights for me and the skeleton crew working at Interior to try very hard to work with states that wanted to reopen national parks during the shutdown to allow them to do that by having states pay for the National Park Service to operate those parks. I supported that program. The Solicitor's Office, the Department of the Treasury, all worked hard to do that. I was advised that I was not allowed to commit the U.S. Treasury to anything, and so I conveyed that to the governors. So all the governors that we worked with went in eyes wide open that they could not be reimbursed without congressional action. Now, there is legislation that's pending to do that reimbursement, and that's the appropriate course forward. But there wasn't a commitment to reimburse them in terms of the negotiations, because that's not something I was allowed to do.
Understand, but you wouldn't resist that legislation if we were to try to reimburse the states for those expenses?
I would not resist the
Okay,
legislation.
thank you. Another one, and again, this is a detailed issue, but just to bring to your attention, I was meeting with some constituents a few weeks ago, again, in the rural part of my district. They brought me a letter from Bureau of Land Management, which was a surprise to them, and they had no idea this was coming, which directed them to reduce their number of permits for cattle grazing on public lands, primarily because of horse and burro management issues. And, you know, you look at some of that rangeland, and it's not the cows that are digging it up and destroying it. It's these wild horses and these wild burros. And by the way, in some cases, they're infringing on other endangered species. They're not indigenous to that territory. Yet it seems like our management of those has clearly been insufficient. I'm wondering if you are concerned about that as well, and whether you think there's some amendments to that management plan that would be helpful.
Thanks for the question. The wild horse and burro situation is very challenging for us. As I'm sure you're aware, the herd doubles in size every 3.5 years. The BLM paid the National Academy of Sciences to do a study to help us understand the circumstance and to make recommendations. There is about $2.3 million, I think, in the budget to fund research into birth control. We are restricted on what we can do with the wild horses and burros based on legislation that was passed, I think, in 1974. So when we're trying to manage the landscapes sustainably, and the BLM's mandate is multiple use and sustained yield, when we have challenges on competitive uses for that land, one of our only options is to reduce grazing. So it's a very difficult problem. The birth control effort is something that we are pushing to make more effective. It is not as effective or as researched as human methods of birth control, and so as we have vaccinated some horses, it doesn't last very long or it's not very effective. We've asked the pharmaceutical industry to help. We've even talked about doing an X Prize kind of thing to see if we can address that, because there are people as passionate about keeping wild horses and burros as there are impacts of those that don't want them. And so we do find ourselves in a very awkward situation.
Well, I appreciate that. And by the way, I think most people recognize it's not in any way an ideal environment for those animals. And when we have to capture and retain them like we do, it's not at all what people had envisioned. So thank you. And Mr. Valadeo, thank you for being gracious. And Mr. Chairman,
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Valadeo.
No problem. Mr. Chair, Secretary, thank you. Obviously, water is something that we're struggling with in my part of California. Earlier this year, 2014 was on track to be the driest year on record, but some storms in February and March brought enough precipitation to make 2014 only the second driest year, behind 1977. Unfortunately, those storms did almost nothing to help the farmers of San Joaquin Valley. Most of the water from those storms, more than 700,000 acre-feet of water, went to the sea because of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service insisted that the water was necessary to meet ESA requirements for the Delta smelt and the salmon. It seems the fishery agencies are continuing to adhere to Delta outflow requirements that clearly are inappropriate for the current drought situation. I am told by water managers in my district that somewhere between 200,000 and 450,000 acre-feet of water that could have been pumped to farms and cities of the San Joaquin Valley without harm to the smelt or salmon had the department exercised the flexibility granted to it under the ESA. It seems that right now the water had been sent out to the ocean and wasted while the farms and the city's livelihoods were obviously dried up. I know that, Madam Secretary, I know that you've spoken to a lot of our water managers, and I understand that maybe there has been some changes lately, so I would like to get an idea of if anything has been helped or any changes have been made in the pumping restrictions. But I do understand that there is quite a bit of flexibility that you do have the power to control or use, and along with the Secretary of Commerce. Could you give us a little insight on what's going on and what differences have been made?
I'll give you a high-level view, and there's a real reason that I have this guy as my Deputy Secretary, because I think that's one of the most challenging issues we're going to face during this period of time are water issues throughout the West. Just to be clear, the releases of water not only are for species, but also for farmers in the Delta and for salination issues. So you've got to maintain appropriate salinities or you end up with challenges in the Delta as well. So it's not wasted. It's an important part of the hydrology of the region. As I was just out in California very recently, touring the facilities after the President made his trip along with Mike Connor, it's very clear that the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service are working closely together to implement a lot of flexibility. For example, they're looking at a 2-week period of time as opposed to a 3-day period of time to average over, which is enabling more water to go in storage. When I was there, it was 5,800 cubic feet per second that was being pumped into storage as compared to like 2,000 to 3,000 last year. So the water managers and the services, the Fish and Wildlife Service and NIMS, are working very, very closely together, recognizing the circumstances that you're in California, and also recognizing that this is not just a profound drought this year, but this is multiple years of a drought, and that is the big issue that we're facing is not enough water. I'm going to turn it over to Mike to pick up what I missed.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the question, Congressman Valadeo. And I know we're short on time, but so I'll give a quick summary here. There has been a lot of flexibility that's been exercised this year. Basically, we've been pumping at bare minimum levels for public health and safety purposes because of the low outflows that exist, and that's pursuant to a state permit. So that's one of the criteria that we operate under, is to satisfy the water quality permit that the State Water Quality Control Board has issued to us.
Is that with the salinity level as well?
Exactly. That monitors the salinity level. One of the biggest concerns this year, and the reason why we are trying to maintain some level of outflow depending on the events, is we are concerned about salinity control in the Delta, and we have to keep the saline water away from the pumps. So that's one criteria. Then the second criteria are the biological opinions. Now, when we're at the low level, we're not operating. The biological opinions aren't controlling, it's the state permit. We've had 2 major precipitation events, and I think that's what you're referring to, where there's an opportunity when there's a lot of precipitation coming through the Delta, outflows are very high, can we pump more water? And in those cases, the biological opinions have been controlling As the Secretary pointed out, this year we have maximized the pumping in both situations under the biological opinions. Last year, when we had a similar situation, we were pumping about 2,000 CFS, 2,500 CFS, when we could be up in that 6,000 CFS, cubic feet per second range. This year, we've maintained pumping when they've had the opportunity up at that higher range because we're doing a lot better job of monitoring the fish. And so we've become comfortable with the fact that we can maximize that pumping without endangering the fish.
How long have you been pumping at 6,000 or 5,800?
I think since the last precipitation event at the end of February, it's probably about a 2 to 3 week period that we were maximizing pumping. Over the last week, that's gone back down. We've lost the effect of that precipitation, and we're back down to bare levels. It's raining today in California. So that's kind of a nutshell of how we've operated. I think we have maximized the ability under state and federal law, but the reality is we still have to comply with those provisions of the state permit and the endangered species act.
The gentleman would yield, when
Yes.
you say maximizing, you mean maximizing under the biological opinion, not maximizing under your ability to pump. Is that correct?
That's correct. We have a range of pumping.
I just wanted to make sure we.
The restriction is not
Yeah.
mechanical, it is legal, right?
It's pursuant to the water quality standards and the biological opinion. So there's only, at this point in time, a few months out of the year when we can maximize pumping from a capacity standpoint. So what I'm talking about, you're correct, Mr. Chairman, we're maximizing under the regulatory structure that we operate.
And that is under the 2008 biological opinion.
That's correct. 2008 biological opinion for smelt
Under the
and
2005
salmon.
biological opinion, did you have more flexibility to operate those pumps?
The range was different, yes.
Wasn't it about 25% different?
That I'll have to answer for the record.
Could you find that out for the record, so we can
Yes.
put that in the record, the difference between the 2005 biological opinion and 2008 biological?
We can do that.
Thank you, gentlemen. Sorry for interrupting.
No, I appreciate it, and I'm done. Thank you.
Well, I know we promised you, Secretary, that you would be able to get out of here by 4:15. It's 4:15. So thank you very much. We appreciate your attendance and look forward to seeing you again soon.
I appreciate the questions and your engagement in this important process. This has been a great committee. I also want to call out Dave Lestrang for your support and guidance. It's been very helpful, and Rick, your help as well. And keeping us on time.
Great. And thank you to your staff also.
Thank you.